What is going on, my fellow Expanse fans? James Hancock here, back to review episode 11 of season 3, an episode called Fallen World. It'll be interesting to see how folks react to tonight's episode, because I think after last week's episode, a lot of people went into this one tonight hoping and praying to get some clarification on the wild vision that James Holden had at the end of last episode. For people who read Abaddon's Gate, they know full well what James Holden's vision signified. But not to worry, I will not give away any spoilers here, because I recognize that there are plenty of people out there who just want to enjoy the show for its own sake without reading the books as well. But also I wanted to thank people for their comments on last week's video, and I really enjoy how the Expanse fan community seems to really enjoy sinking their teeth into the details of the science in the science fiction equation. And as a lot of people have pointed out, the really hardcore, grounded scientific elements make the more fantastic elements with the alien technology all the more interesting, using that gritty science as a foundation to build upon. One commenter by the name of Blood Angel pointed out how, because the ships are basically integrated like a skyscraper as opposed to horizontally like a naval ship, when the crew suddenly encountered massive deceleration at the end of last week's episode, they didn't fly forward or backward, they flew up. It's just little bits of detail like that that just make this overall vision so much more rich and rewarding. And we got a lot of those details tonight, looking at the aftermath of this horrible catastrophe that basically befell every single ship inside this enormous bubble. At times, this episode almost kind of felt like a horror episode, just because there was so much blood and mayhem. Because in the aftermath of this massive deceleration that befell all the various ships, basically a third of the people from all three factions are dead, another third are injured, and the final third are left to try and pick up the pieces. But I did get a nice surge of emotion at the end where we see the Belters stepping up to play a new role, trying to help out their fellow human beings irrespective of where they come from. But I don't want to get ahead of myself, because this is a recap and review, and I want to go step by step through all the juicy morsels of this individual episode. And it really does look like they're going to wrap up Abaddon's Gate in only a handful of episodes. I guess I'll have to wait and see in 2 episodes whether or not that's a mistake. But irrespective of my feelings about rushing through the 3rd book, I can safely say there's going to be a giant hole in my life when the season draws to a close. But I'm thoroughly enjoying reading Cibola Burn, and there's like 5 more books to read beyond that. So there's plenty left for me to enjoy in this remarkable universe between now and season 4. In any case, let's dig into this particular episode. What I really enjoyed is how it gave us a hint of the possibility that the people of Earth, the people of Mars, and the Belters might actually be able to find a way to get along when facing a catastrophe that affects them all. I know a lot of people have talked about how one of the fastest ways to bring about world peace on our planet would be for us to encounter an alien race. Obviously, that is purely hypothetical, but with a catastrophic event like this, with so many lives at risk, and so many lives already lost, and this mysterious nucleus pulling all the ships toward it, only in the face of that kind of threat can human beings start to overlook some of the petty grievances between each other. Unless, of course, you're Melba, aka Clarissa Mao, who's the only character in this episode who really seems to have her own agenda that's totally detached from the crisis at large. If anything, she's using the crisis to her advantage to try to get closer to the Rossi. Because as we're starting to see, she basically is completely consumed by revenge. And no matter who steps in her way, no matter how innocent they might be, their life is forfeit in her pursuit of revenge. And I think a lot of people watching the show have been confused by whether or not they're supposed to be rooting for her or to find her justified. And probably because I already read the book Abaddon's Gate, I went into this part of the season knowing that she basically is a villain. She might be a sympathetic villain. Perhaps we can see things from her point of view in terms of how, from her perspective, her family has been completely ruined by the actions of James Holden. But from my point of view, she's basically a lost soul. Because as we see in this episode, she's more than happy to try and murder Tilly in order to get her way. Anna tries to talk some sense into her and basically convince her that at this point, all she can do is try to beg for mercy for the actions that she's already committed. But Clarissa is totally consumed by her need for revenge. She gets in this giant exoskeleton. It looks like something almost out of the end of Aliens. And because of the proximity of all the ships to one another now, she's able to make the quick jump over to the Rossi. And there she has a pretty epic battle with Naomi. I really enjoyed that, because Naomi obviously is weightless and is able to hop around, while Clarissa is basically impervious to harm and has much better strength. And she's basically on the verge of crushing Naomi's head right off her shoulders before Anna arrives in yet another exoskeleton and saves the day. I was actually kind of hoping for Clarissa's story to be extended and prolonged a little bit more, because the conclusion to her story doesn't come until fairly close to the end of the 3rd book, which makes me think that some of the other events in the latter part of the 3rd book are also going to be dramatically compressed. Because my only real criticism of this episode is a lengthy series of scenes that I regarded as filler that are basically there to replace scenes that would be far more expensive. And the scenes that I'm talking about are those between Ashford and Drummer, where basically they find themselves in a situation where they're both bleeding out and dying, and they're caught between some machinery where in order to free one, they'd have to crush the other. And over the course of the episode, they have long conversations and they sing songs, and ultimately Drummer decides to sacrifice herself in order to free Ashford. Luckily, she does not die, and Ashford tells the whole crew about her actions. But all these scenes were cooked up for the show because in the book Abaddon's Gate, there's some battle scenes of enormous spectacle, and I imagine we'll probably get some in episodes 12 and 13. But very clearly, they tried to come up with a cheaper alternative for the events right after this catastrophe with the deceleration. But the good news is, Drummer's actions serve as a positive example to Ashford. And Ashford comes up with this incredible idea of spinning up the drum. If people remember, the behemoth used to be the Nauvoo. The Nauvoo is going to carry Mormons across the universe to another planet. And it has this drum that can spin and simulate gravity. The biggest problem with this deceleration is that in zero gravity, wounds don't heal correctly. In zero gravity, a lot of internal injuries are basically a death sentence. So Ashford makes this incredible gesture, both to the Martians as well as to those on the UN and Thomas Prince, and he says, send your wounded over to us, let them heal, their wounds can drain. And I feel like this is a moment where the Belters have basically asserted themselves in a really humanitarian way, showing that they can do more than just look after their own self-interest. They can actually be there to help the entire solar system, not just their individual faction. Because as we see aboard Bobby's ship and her various teammates, the solar system remains incredibly fractured and remains very tribal. Most of her teammates have absolutely no use for James Holden whatsoever. They're constantly trying to persuade her into allowing them just to kill him outright. And that Bobby knows him relatively well. She knows that he's not a killer, and she also knows that he probably has incredibly valuable information and that her teammates are just being insanely hostile and deliberately misinterpreting what they saw inside the nucleus. They're pretending as if somehow Holden orchestrated this entire catastrophe, and Holden's just in this deep, dark coma as a result of this enormous vision that he was subjected to when he linked up with the nucleus. But as they're slowly flying him back to the Martians world, he'll be subjected to horrible interrogation. He's just completely conked out, so he's totally oblivious. But at the very end of the episode, he comes to, and just wide-eyed with terror, tells Bobby that he has seen the end of everything. As a lot of people pointed out, his vision at the end of last episode, if you look closely, was of our solar system as we saw that beam with the color of the protomolecule blasting forth out of the nucleus, going throughout our solar system, taking out our sun, basically ending life in our solar system as they know it. But all I'll say about that vision, without giving away spoilers, is that there's more to that vision than just the threat of annihilation to our solar system. So as far as the rest of the episode is concerned, I think they're finally finding a way to make Anna an interesting character. As fans of the book are already well aware, Anna's a very well-written, sympathetic character in the third book, and I feel like they've been kind of struggling to find a way to make Anna as interesting as she deserves to be. But I feel like watching her react in horror to all the injuries and all the deaths around her, I found that actually to be the most interesting part of the show, when like the little details like vacuuming blood out of the air, and all of her genuine, sincere offers to try to help those around them. And I feel like watching Tilly die in her arms is really what allows her to flip a switch and start taking action, because she starts to recognize Clarissa, aka Melba, for the threat that she truly is. I mean, at this point, Melba's basically like a mad dog who's broken off of her chain. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what they do with her character for the next 2 episodes. But the big joy this episode is watching Naomi rejoin her crew aboard the Rossi. There's this great bit where she wakes up on her ship and her entire console's about to explode. But because of this new speed limit, the explosion itself happens in slow motion. At first, it's like a little yellow ball and it starts to spread. And as I was looking at it, I was thinking, is this some weird alien hostile takeover of her ship, or what's going on here? But no, it's just an explosion. But it never occurred to me, of course, even an explosion is going to be affected by this new change in physics that affects the entire bubble. But I thought the special effects there were particularly well done. But we get this great reunion where she returns to the Rossi. She finds Alex. He's totally spaced out. He's got a big chunk of metal sticking out of his arm. And of course, country music on the headphones floating around. And when she finds Amos, basically by following a trail of blood through the air, there is a kind of a sweet scene where Amos, who typically is just this big, macho, muscular, tough guy, asks her if she's back to stay or if she's just back to help, and she tells him that she's back to stay. So as grim and nasty and bloody as this episode might have been, it actually was a very optimistic, hopeful episode, because we see our central characters reuniting, and we also see the Belters extending this incredible gesture to their fellow human beings, trying to help people. And I just can't wait to see what happens next, because Bobby's obviously going to have to make a choice about what to do with Holden. Something tells me Bobby will very quickly be put in yet another situation where she'll have to choose between the greater good and her Martian faction. And without giving anything away, I'll just say that human ignorance, human human stupidity, human hostility, basically humanity's fear of the unknown will lead to even more consequences in the face of this obviously very superior technology. And I just can't wait to dig into all of it over the next 2 weeks. In any case, I'm going to wrap this video up. If you enjoyed my recap and review, please consider giving my channel a subscribe. I always appreciate the comments in the comments below. And also you can always find me on Twitter @Colbrax if you want to talk more. But I've said it before and I'll say it again. I think the Expanse fan community is the best of any franchise out there. People just seem so warm and so sincere and so well informed. It's just very refreshing each week to talk with people who are obsessed with this show and these books. So thanks as always for watching my channel. I really appreciate it. And I'll be back at y'all in the very near future. But as always, onwards and upwards.